They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you what to do when that blood turns to poison. My name is Julia Bryant, and for 10 years my entire life was poured into the Flower and Finch, our small town's bakery. It wasn't just my dream. It was my $80,000 fortress, my one shot at a life I'd built with my own two hands. I thought that money was for my future. I never imagined my own family would see it as their solution. I never imagined I'd have to choose between my brother's mistakes and my entire life. And I never imagined that no would be the word that brought baseball bats to my door. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. For 10 years, I've woken up at 4 a.m. My name is Julia Bryant. I'm 28 and my hands have been dusted in flour before the sun even knew it was morning. I'm a baker at the Flower and Finch, but that's not the whole truth. The Finch isn't just a job, it's the 50-year-old cornerstone of Harmony Creek, the one place that smells like cardamom and yeast instead of regret. This is the only home I've ever truly felt. Harmony Creek is a small town, the kind of tight-knit American community where everyone knows your business, and the Finch is its heart. It's where you go after a funeral, and it's where you pick up the cake for a first birthday. I wasn't just a baker, I was a quiet custodian of the town's memories, steeped in the scent of sourdough and dark roast coffee. And now its beloved owner, Mr. Henderson, was finally retiring. He pulled me aside last Tuesday, his own flour-dusted hands trembling slightly. The corporate chain Quick Crust had made an offer. We both shuddered. Quick Crust would gut the place, paint it beige, and start shipping in frozen dough. It would kill the town's heart. "Julia," he said, his voice thick. "This place, it has a soul, and you're the only one who sees it." He looked at me, his eyes kind but clear. "I'm offering you first refusal. Lock, stock, and the apartment upstairs. $80,000. It's what my father paid, and it's what I'm asking. It's yours if you want it." My breath hitched. $80,000. It was the exact number. The number I'd been whispering to myself in the dark for 5 years. My Finch Fund. This was it. My one shot not just at a career, but at a life, at freedom. A space that was truly mine, built on my own terms, not the ones my family had always tried to set for me. You see, I carry this deep, aching vulnerability, a desperate, unfulfilled need for my family's approval. To them, I am Julia, the aimless daughter, the one who went to culinary school instead of getting a business degree like my older brother Mark. Mark is the golden boy, the town's future, with his image-obsessed wife Chloe and a job at the bank. My father, David, is a man carved from traditional pride. He wants success he can brag about at the Rotary Club, and baking doesn't count. My mother, Sarah, is softer, which makes her more dangerous. She wields emotional manipulation with the precision of a surgeon. They love me, I suppose, but it's a conditional, disappointed kind of love. So I saved. I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment, drove a 15-year-old car, and patched my own jeans. Every spare dollar went into the Finch Fund. That $80,000 sitting in my savings account wasn't just money, it was a fortress. It was 10,000 early mornings, countless burns on my arms, and a wall built brick by brick against my family's expectations. It was my future, my joy at Mr. Henderson's offer was so bright it hurt a physical thing in my chest, but tangled up with it was a nervous, fluttering dread. I had to tell them. This was the moment. This wasn't some hobby. This was an acquisition, a legacy. This was something big. This was the moment they would finally see me. Now I'm driving to the obligatory Sunday dinner at my parents' house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The unsigned preliminary sales agreement is in my purse, heavy as a brick. It feels like the most important document in the world, a declaration of independence. My heart is hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of terror and bright, dangerous hope. I can already picture their faces. My dad's grudging respect. My mom's surprise, maybe even tears of pride. Mark, for once, looking at his little sister like she'd finally done something right. I pull into the familiar driveway, take a deep, shuddering breath, and cut the engine. This time, I tell myself it will be different. This time, they'll finally understand. This time, they will finally be proud. I walked in and the air was wrong. It was thick and sour like milk left out overnight. Sunday dinner at my parents' house was usually a performance of strained cheer, but today the cheer part had been cancelled. The room was a pressure cooker, and the lid was rattling. Mark, my golden boy brother, and his wife Chloe were huddled by the fireplace, pale and whispering. Chloe kept dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled napkin, her makeup already streaked. My mother Sarah was darting around the kitchen, her movements jerky and bird-like. She kept shooting me these anxious, appraising glances, the kind a butcher gives a cut of meat he's about to weigh. My father David was in his armchair staring at the blank television, his jaw working silently. I clutched my purse, the sales agreement for the Finch still inside a dead weight. "Julia, honey, sit down," my mother said, her voice too bright, too thin. "I actually have some incredible news." I started trying to inject my own hope into the suffocating atmosphere. Before I could say bakery, Mark just broke. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was an ugly, wet sob that ripped out of him. "It's over," he choked out. "Everything is over." Chloe burst into a fresh wail, burying her face in her hands. My father's face went from granite to a deep, alarming shade of purple. "You stupid, stupid boy," David hissed, his rage directed not at the crime but at the shame of it. What mistake?" I asked, my stomach turning to ice. Mark, the man my father always called the responsible one, the treasurer for the town's youth sports league, started to babble. He made a mistake. He borrowed from the league's fund, a sure thing crypto scheme Chloe's cousin recommended. "It was supposed to be a quick flip, Julie," he whispered, his eyes red and puffy. "Just a few weeks, to get us ahead." But the money was gone. Vanished. He'd been found out. The league president had called him this morning. He was ruined. "How much?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. 150,000, Mark whispered. My mother let out a sound like a dying animal clutching the kitchen counter, but Mark quickly corrected himself, his head snapping up, his eyes suddenly sharp and focused on me. "But I don't need all of it right now, I just need 80,000 by Monday morning." He said it fast, like he'd rehearsed it. "Just 80 to pay back the league's main operating fund before the bank flags the account. If I can do that, the president said he might hold off on pressing charges, give me time." $80,000. The exact number. The room went dead silent. The sound of the refrigerator's hum filled the void. And then, as if choreographed, all four of them, David, Sarah, Mark, and Chloe, turned their heads and looked directly at me. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin cold and tight. The sales agreement in my purse suddenly felt like ash. "How?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "How did you know what I have?" My mother flinched, her eyes darting away. I may have mentioned you were frugal," she stammered. "We were just talking, Julia, just brainstorming solutions." They knew. They had sat in this very room before I even arrived and discussed my savings, my $80,000, my fortress, as their solution. It was a betrayal so perfect, so complete. It was almost impressive. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't a person. I was a walking ATM with a convenient family connection. I was a line of credit. No. The word was small, but it landed in the room like a grenade. "What?" Chloe snapped, her grief vanishing, replaced by a venomous hiss. "Julia, I'm talking about my life," Mark shouted, scrambling to his feet, his face red. "I'm talking about my life too," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. I ripped the folded agreement from my purse and slammed it on the coffee table. This is for the bakery, for the Finch. Mr. Henderson is selling it to me. This $80,000 is my life, Mark. It's everything I've worked for. It's my future." My father exploded. He slammed his fist on the dining room table, making the silverware jump. "A bakery!" he roared. The shame had found its target, me. "You are throwing away your brother's entire future, his family, for a batch of sticky buns." It's not "It's my business," I cried. "He stole money. That's a crime." "He made a mistake," my father bellowed. "It's what families do, Julia. They help. They stick together." I stood up my chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "I worked for that money. It's mine. He made this mess. The answer is no." I turned toward the door, my whole body shaking. I could feel the heat of their hatred on my back. "Julia!" My mother's voice was ice. All the fake tears were gone. "If you walk out that door, Julia Bryant, don't you ever come back." I stopped my hand on the doorknob. "You are no daughter of mine." I looked back. My father, his face a mask of stone, nodded once. "She's right. This family sticks together." I looked at all of them. My broken brother, my weeping mother, my furious father. They weren't a family. They were a cabal. And I was the sacrifice. I opened the door. "Then I guess I'm not family." I stepped out, pulling the door shut behind me, the sound of my mother's shattering theatrical wail following me into the cold night. 6 months. Half a year since I'd walked out that door, the sound of my mother's wail a satisfying click as I pulled it shut. The silence from my family had been total a vacuum I hadn't let myself examine too closely. I was now officially the owner of the Flower and Finch. The bank had been skeptical. A 28-year-old single woman with no collateral. But my business plan was meticulous, and Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, had co-signed for a small business loan to cover the ancient plumbing, a new convection oven, and operating costs for the first quarter. The apartment upstairs was sparse. For the first month, it was just a mattress on the floor, a hot plate, and 2 milk crates for a table. But it was mine. The air was clean. It didn't smell like obligation or disappointment. My life compressed into a simple, grueling rhythm of 18-hour days. Wake up at 4 a.m., the cold floor biting at my feet. Bake. Open the doors at 6 a.m., the bell over the door a cheerful, jarring sound. Serve, clean, manage inventory, payroll, social media marketing. Close the doors at 6 p.m. Clean again. Collapse into bed by 8 p.m. Exhaustion was my only constant companion, a heavy welcome blanket that kept the ghosts at bay. I had changed the locks even though they never had a key. I had blocked their numbers, all 4 of them. The few attempts they made to contact me through old high school friends fishing for information were met with a polite, "I'm not interested in talking." The schism was a cold, hard stone in my gut. Some mornings I'd be kneading dough, the repetitive push and pull a kind of therapy, and the memory of my mother's face, that mask of ice and calculation, would make my hands falter. The sorrow was real, a sharp, clean ache for a family I'd wanted but never had. But the freedom, God, the freedom was intoxicating. It was a sharp alpine air I'd never been allowed to breathe. I was harder now, quieter. The part of me that had perpetually, desperately craved their approval had been surgically, violently removed that Sunday night, and I was stronger for it. I wasn't entirely alone. I'd used part of the loan to hire a local contractor, Liam, to help renovate the aging apartment. He was. And different. He was the antithesis of my family. He was steady, quiet, and had a pair of kind eyes that actually listened. The first time I'd nervously second-guessed a paint chip, worried he'd think I was frivolous, he just waited, then said, "It's your call, Julia. It's your wall. I'll make it work." He respected my no. He didn't push. He didn't cajole. He didn't manipulate. He just showed up, did his job with a craftsman's care, and after the first week started bringing me a second coffee around 10 a.m., placing it on the counter without a word. "Just 'cause," he'd muttered when I finally asked. A slow, hesitant friendship was blooming, a tiny green shoot in the rubble of my old life. It felt like the spark of something more, but I was too terrified to even name it. Liam represented the new, healthy community I was trying to build, one person at a time. But the old community, the one I was born into, hadn't forgotten. Harmony Creek was talking. Mark's embezzlement was public knowledge, a stain on the town's trust. He'd avoided jail time. My father had apparently mortgaged their house to the hilt to cover the initial payback, but he was ruined. He'd lost his job at the bank, his reputation. But my family, led by Sarah and Chloe, was not taking this lying down. They were spinning a new narrative. I'd hear whispers of it when I delivered pastries to the town hall or the library. They were the victims. Mark had made a simple human mistake. And I was the villain. I was the cold, selfish daughter. The story, expertly crafted by my mother and parroted by Chloe, was that they had given me the money for the bakery as a family gift, and when they needed help, I stole it back, abandoning my poor crucified brother and leaving them to clean up the mess. The new normal hit me in the face in the dairy aisle of the grocery store. I hadn't seen her in person since that night. My mother. She looked older, her face pinched and sour, her grief weaponized. She cornered me between the half and half and the Greek yogurt. "Julia." Her voice was a low hiss dripping with poison. "I know you see my calls." I just clutched the handle of my basket, my knuckles white. "Julia, please," she said, her voice rising just enough for Mrs. Gable from the post office to look over. "People are saying terrible things. Your brother, he can't find work. Your father, his health, this is killing him." The old guilt, the old conditioning rose up in my throat like bile. She was playing to an audience. I looked at her, this woman who had disowned me, this stranger who had tried to gut my future for the son she actually loved. My heart was a trip hammer of pain and pure, unadulterated resolve. "You should go," I said, my voice flat dead. I pushed my cart past her, my wheels squeaking on the linoleum. I didn't look back. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they'd just be whispers of poison I could avoid. But they weren't just angry. They were coming for me. I got back to the Finch that evening, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my heart still racing from the encounter. That's when I saw it. Taped to the glass of the front door, perfectly centered, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a letter. It was from a law firm embossed with a local attorney's name I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I tore it open. It was a formal threat of a lawsuit. They were claiming filial responsibility. They were demanding financial support for the emotional and financial distress my abandonment had caused them. And the kicker, they were claiming a stake in my business, which they alleged was funded by a verbal family agreement. It was ludicrous. It was insane. It was a clear, unambiguous declaration of war. The frivolous lawsuit threat snapped the last lingering thread of my sorrow. The girl who had felt that pang of loss in the grocery store was gone. In her place was a woman holding a legal document that felt like a declaration of war. The cold, clear-burning anger was clarifying. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to destroy what I had built. They wanted to bleed me. Liam saw the look on my face when I showed him the papers. "You need a lawyer, Julia," he said, his voice low. "Not to fight this, but to end it." He was right. On his advice, I met with a local attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Alvarez. She read the document, her lips pursing. "This is garbage," she said, tossing it onto her desk. "It's legally baseless. They have no claim to your business, and filial responsibility isn't something they can leverage this way in this state." I felt a rush of relief. "But," she added, her eyes meeting mine, "that's not the point. This isn't a lawsuit, Ms. Bryant. It's a weapon. They're trying to bleed you dry, in time, in money, and in spirit. They want to bury you in legal fees and stress until you break. So we'll send a cease and desist, but you need to be prepared. This is what desperate people do." I walked out of her office with a new kind of resolve. They wanted to bleed me, I was going to cauterize the wound. That night, I turned to Liam as we sat in my sparse apartment above the bakery. "I want to protect this place, Liam. Everything. Not just the windows, not just the door. Everything." He nodded, his expression serious. "Okay, I know some guys." The next day, his guys arrived. This wasn't some cheap DIY kit from a big box store. This was state-of-the-art. They installed high-definition night vision cameras with cloud-based recording and high-fidelity audio. We put them everywhere. One covering the front entrance, one in the alley by the back door, one covering the register, one on the main baking floor. We even put one in the stairwell leading up to my apartment. I wasn't just building a bakery, I was building a fortress. I spent the next day on the phone upgrading my business insurance. I walked through the bakery with my agent documenting the full value of the new $10,000 espresso machine, the new convection ovens, the custom-built glass display cases, every spatula, every bag of Belgian chocolate. If they were trying to bleed me, I'd make sure my armor was thick enough to break their teeth. But fortification wasn't enough. Ms. Alvarez said they wanted to bleed me in spirit. They wanted me to be scared to hide. I was going to do the exact opposite. The Harmony Creek Gazette had been asking me for a new business spotlight for weeks. I'd been putting it off, too busy, too tired. The next morning I called them. "I'm ready for my interview." The reporter, a young woman named Becky, was thrilled. We sat in the bakery, the morning light streaming and the smell of fresh bread thick in the air. I told her my story, the edited version. I talked about my American dream, my passion, my deep respect for Mr. Henderson's legacy. I talked about the importance of community, how a town's heart is in its local businesses, how we have to protect them. I pointedly, and with a warmth I didn't have to fake, thanked my new friends and neighbors, glancing right at Liam, who was pretending to fix a hinge nearby. I never mentioned my family. Not once. The article came out 2 days later, front page of the lifestyle section. The photo was perfect, me and Liam standing out front under the new Flower and Finch sign, both of us smiling, him holding a coffee, me holding a tray of pastries. We looked happy, successful, rooted. The interview wasn't just a feel-good story. It was a taunt. It was a public declaration of my success and my happiness. It said, "I'm still here, I'm thriving, and you can't touch me." I was planting a flag. I wasn't hiding. I was building my legacy, and my new family was this town, the people who brought me coffee, the neighbors who waved through the window. My relationship with Liam deepened. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable, haggard, stressed, and now furious. And he didn't run. He didn't try to fix me. He just respected my strength, and then he brought me a drill to help install the new deadbolt on my apartment door. I felt powerful. I felt safe in my new fortress, behind my new walls of insurance and community support. But I forgot what Ms. Alvarez said. I forgot that when you corner desperate, venomous people, they don't just give up. They get a bigger hammer. It happened at 3:14 a.m. I was asleep, the deep, exhausted sleep of a baker. The sound wasn't a tinkle, it was an explosion, a violent crash from the shop below that shook the floorboards. I was out of bed instantly, my heart trying to escape my chest, my hand already grabbing my phone. I fumbled for the security app, my fingers shaking, bringing up the front camera feed. But I didn't need it. I already knew. I crept down the stairs, my apartment still dark, and looked through the peephole of the stairwell door. The bakery was dark, but the front of the shop was a spiderweb of shattered glass, the cold night air already pouring in. And there, in the middle of my clean floor, lay the brick. It was wrapped in something. I unlocked the door, my feet crunching on the glass, and grabbed it. It was a single piece of notebook paper, wrapped tight with a rubber band. The handwriting was my mother's. Loopy, precise, and full of rage. "You think you're better than us? You'll pay, you ungrateful butch." 2 weeks had passed since the brick. Friday night. The new front window was in a sheet of pristine, unscratched glass that seemed to mock me with its perfection. I was on edge, a plucked guitar string humming at a frequency only I could hear. I was resolute, but I wasn't stupid. Liam was upstairs in my apartment, a brave attempt at normalcy. He was making us dinner, and the rich smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes was a small, warm bubble of safety in the dark. The bakery below was locked up tight, dark and silent, my new fortress. We were trying to have a normal night, a normal date, but I couldn't shake the shadow of the brick. I found myself checking the security feed on my phone every 20 minutes, a nervous tick I couldn't seem to break. Liam didn't mention it, he just kept stirring the sauce. I was chopping basil when my personal phone, the one not connected to the business, buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a text, it was an email. The sender's address was a jumble of letters and numbers I didn't recognize from an anonymous mail service, afriend@mailanon.com. My stomach clenched. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. I clicked it open, my hands suddenly damp. The message was one sentence. No greeting, no sign-off. St. Jude's Hospital Room 304, your father. He's asking for you. The knife clattered from my hand onto the cutting board. I didn't cut myself, but the sharp sound made Liam turn. Julia, you okay? His voice seemed to come from 1,000 miles away. I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the ultimate test. The brick had been a physical threat, an act of blind, stupid rage. This was surgical. This was a scalpel aimed with precision at the one tiny, stupid, vulnerable part of me I hadn't managed to burn away, the microscopic sliver of hope that my father, deep down, the father who taught me to ride a bike, might still love me. The brick was my mother's rage. This was her using him as a weapon. What if it was real? What if the stress, the mortgage, the shame? What if he'd had a heart attack? What if he was lying in a hospital bed dying, and his last coherent act was to ask for me? The old familiar guilt, the sorrow I thought I'd cauterized, washed over me fresh and sickening. My hands started to shake violently. The old Julia, the girl from that Sunday dinner 6 months ago, would already be grabbing her keys. She'd be sprinting to her car, weeping with anticipatory grief and guilt, ready to forgive everything just to be there. Julia, what is it? Liam was at my side, wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes scanning my face. I couldn't speak. I just turned the phone screen toward him. I watched his face harden, the kindness in his eyes solidifying into a cold anger I hadn't seen before. Julia, he said, his voice low and steady. That's a trap. But what if it's not? I whispered it, hating the weak, pleading tremble in my own voice. What if he's dying, Liam? He's my father. He's the man who disowned you for money, Liam said, not unkindly but with a brutal firmness. He's the man whose wife sent you a brick. This is what they do. They're trying to get you out of the building. They're trying to get you out. He was right. The logic was cold, hard, and undeniable. But the emotion, the what if, it was a hook pulling at my insides, a lifetime of conditioning screaming at me to go. I stood there frozen, caught in the unbearable tension between the daughter I was raised to be and the woman I was trying to become. I looked at the phone, at the cruel, simple message. I looked at Liam. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was just standing there, solid and present, trusting me to make the choice. I took a breath, then another. The new Julia, the owner of the Finch, the woman who had faced them down, the woman who had installed the high-definition cameras, stopped. I didn't run. I didn't grab my keys. I thought. I slid my phone open, my fingers still shaking, but I didn't go to my car keys. I went to the Google search bar. St. Jude's Hospital, Harmony Creek. I found the main line. I pressed call. A polite automated voice answered. Thank you for calling St. Jude's. I pressed 0 for the operator, my heart hammering. St. Jude's, this is Brenda. How can I help you? Hi. My voice was rough, barely a croak. I'm checking on a patient, please. David Bryant, Bryant. I heard the clacking of keys on her end. It felt like an eternity. I'm sorry, ma'am. Her voice was polite, professional, and utterly chilling. We have no patient by that name currently admitted. My stomach dropped. Oh, could you check? Maybe the emergency room, he might have just come in. Another pause, more clacking. I've checked all admissions and our ER roster, ma'am. There is no David Bryant in our system. Thank you, I whispered. I hung up. The lie was so absolute, so cruel, so specific, room 304, that it burned away the last lingering wisp of my childhood loyalty. It wasn't just a trap. It was a lure baited with the imagined corpse of my father. They weren't just trying to get me out of the building. They were trying to break me, to hurt me in the one place they knew I was still soft. The last of my sorrow didn't just evaporate, it flashed into scalding steam, replaced by a cold, terrifying, diamond-hard clarity. They didn't just want my money. They didn't just want my bakery. They wanted to destroy me. As I stood there, my hand still on the phone processing this final absolute betrayal, my other phone buzzed. The bakery phone. The one I kept in my apron pocket, the one tied to the security system. It wasn't a call. It wasn't an email. It was an alert. Liam and I looked at each other, our blood turning to ice. Slowly, I pulled the bakery phone out. The notification was stark white against the black screen, motion-detected back alley door. Liam, I whispered, my voice hollow, all the air gone from my lungs. He was already grabbing his tablet from the counter, the one he'd synced to the system. He pulled up the live feed. The high-definition night vision camera flooded the screen with its ghostly green light. The alley was empty for a split second, and then they were there. 3 figures dressed in dark hoodies, their faces shadowed. They stepped into the frame right under the motion light. The camera was so clear I could see their faces as they looked up. It was my father David. It was my brother Mark. And my mother Sarah, hovering behind them like a vulture. Julia! Liam's voice was tight with disbelief, his hand gripping my arm. They're here. All 3 of them. Your dad. He's got a crowbar. And Mark has a baseball bat. We were locked in. My back was pressed against the apartment door, the deadbolt Liam had installed, the only thing between us and them. He held the tablet in front of us, his grip so tight his knuckles were white. We watched in silent, high-definition, ghostly green horror. The back alley door was made of solid oak. It didn't just open. My father David wedged the crowbar into the jamb. The sound was a high-pitched screech of metal on metal, and then a deafening crack of splintering wood. He put his shoulder into it, and the door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges. They poured in. Not thieves, not burglars. They were an invading army. David, his face purpled with a rage I'd never seen, held the crowbar like a weapon of war. And Mark, my golden boy brother, hefted the wooden baseball bat, his old high school slugger, onto his shoulder. My mother Sarah, her face a pale, twisted mask of vicarious fury, shoved them forward. Do it! She hissed, her voice cutting through the high-fidelity audio. Destroy it. Burglary in progress. 114 Main Street. Liam was whispering into his own phone, his body shielding me, his eyes never leaving the screen. Multiple intruders. We are the owners. We're upstairs unarmed. Yes, 114 Main. Please hurry. He hung up and put his hand on the small of my back. It was the only warm thing in the universe. Below us, the siege began. The first sound was the worst, the musical, catastrophic crash of the main glass display case. It was custom built. It had taken my entire renovation budget. I heard Mark grunt with the effort of the swing. Then he turned to my new espresso machine, the $10,000 heart of my business. The first thwack of the bat was a dull metallic chunk. The second was a hiss as a steam pipe ruptured. Ruin it! Sarah's voice was a high-pitched shriek echoing in the small space. Ruin it all! She took everything from us. She left us with nothing. My father joined in. He wasn't yelling. He was grunting, punctuating every act of destruction. He took the crowbar to the registers, smashing the screens. Clang. Ungrateful crash. This was our money, family money, smash. She shamed us. Mark was a whirlwind of blind, jealous rage. He swung the bat at the walls, at the bags of coffee, at the custom shelving. She thinks she's so smart, he panted, his voice thick with exertion. Thinks she's better than me. Let's see her run her little bakery now. My hand was over my mouth, but I wasn't screaming. I wasn't even crying. My eyes were wide, my body rigid, my blood turned to ice water. A cold, devastating, and final understanding was settling over me. I was witnessing an execution. I was watching my family, the people who were supposed to love me, systematically murder my life. And I was recording. Every word, every crash, every grunt. This was who they were. This was the truth that had been hiding under 6 months of whispers and a lifetime of conditional love. The person they were destroying downstairs wasn't just the owner of the Finch. They were beating the life out of the little girl who had spent 28 years just wanting them to be proud of her. And in the silence of my own mind, I let her die. "The police are on their way," Liam whispered, his voice shaking. "They're coming fast." I just nodded, my eyes fixed on the screen. I couldn't look away. I had to see it all. I watched my mother Sarah join in. She wasn't strong enough for a bat, but her petty vandalism was almost worse. She ripped my beautiful custom-baked loaves from the shelves, tearing them apart with her bare hands. She went to my dry storage pantry, grabbed the 50-pound bags of flour, my lifeblood, and ripped them open, pouring them onto the floor in great ghostly plumes. She threw expensive Belgian chocolate calottes against the walls like buckshot. Then Mark saw it. He stopped, his chest heaving. He walked over to the wall where I had proudly framed the Harmony Creek Gazette article, the one with the picture of me and Liam smiling. "Look at her," he spat. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a can. A hiss filled the audio feed. Spray paint. He shook it, the sound of the metal ball a sick rattle. And then he sprayed a thick black line right across the glass, right across my face. He wrote one word: slut. Every crash, every shout, every hiss of paint. It was an act of terrible possessive love, twisted into a violent, unrecognizable thing. They couldn't have me, so they were erasing me. I was witnessing my own funeral, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I was about to be reborn from the ashes. And just as Mark stepped back to admire his work, a new sound entered the feed. Faint at first, a distant rising wail. Wee woo, wee woo. It grew fast, louder, closer. On the tablet, I watched all three of them freeze. Mark, his arm still raised, the bat dangling from his hand. My father dropped the crowbar. The heavy clang on the tile floor was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. And my mother. Her face, caught in the ghoulish green light of the camera, crumpled. She let out a pathetic little squeak like a stepped-on mouse. The back alley, the one they had used as an entrance, suddenly flooded with flashing red and blue lights, painting their horrified faces in strobing, chaotic color. Then the amplified voice, so loud it vibrated the tablet in Liam's hands. "This is the Harmony Creek PD. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands in the air." After what felt like a lifetime huddled in the dark of my apartment, a sharp official knock came at my door. "Ms. Bryant, Officer Chen. It's all clear. They're in custody." Liam's hand, which had never left the small of my back, gave me a gentle push. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm right here." We walked down the stairs, the ones I'd painstakingly painted a cheerful, buttery yellow. They were untouched, a strange, clean tunnel of normalcy. But when I stepped through the doorway at the bottom, the air was sucked from my lungs. I put my hand to my mouth, not to stifle a sob, but a raw, dry gasp. It was a war zone. My fortress, my beautiful bakery, my Finch, was annihilated. It wasn't just broken, it was desecrated. The air was a toxic, gagging miasma of spilled espresso, raw sugar yeast, and the sharp metallic tang of hate. Flour and finely pulverized glass mixed on the floor in a thick, dirty, toxic snow that crunched under the officers' heavy boots. My $10,000 espresso machine was a mangled corpse of hissing pipes, dented steel, and shattered ceramic. The custom-built display case was a jagged pile of glass shards and splintered oak. And the walls, the spray paint was everywhere, dripping in black, angry lines. "Slut! Thief! Ungrateful bitch!" Officer Chen was talking, her voice grim. "The damage, Ms. Bryant, we're estimating well over $60,000, maybe more." I just nodded, numb, my eyes fixed on the black paint. I couldn't breathe that air. I turned, pushing past Liam, and walked back up to my apartment, my feet wooden. I went to the front window, the one overlooking Main Street. The entire block was lit up like a twisted, hellish Christmas, all strobing red and blue. A small crowd of my neighbors, woken by the sirens, stood on the opposite sidewalk in their bathrobes and coats, their faces pale with shock. And then I saw them. The police were leading them out the smashed front door one by one. First Mark. He looked utterly pathetic, his face streaked with tears and snot, his shoulders slumped. He looked like the golden boy who had finally truly been caught. Then my father. He looked small. The apoplectic rage was gone, replaced by a gray, hollow-eyed shock. He shuffled his hands, cuffed behind his back, looking at the pavement. And then, my mother. She was last. An officer was guiding her firmly by the elbow. As they moved her toward the open door of the patrol car, she stopped. She felt me. Her head snapped up and her eyes, cutting through the chaos of the flashing lights, found mine in the window. Our gazes locked. I saw her face illuminated in a perfect, horrifying flash of red. It wasn't shame. It wasn't regret. It wasn't even fear. Her face was a mask of pure reptilian, unadulterated hatred. It was the look of someone who had tried to murder me and was furious I had survived. In that one silent, soul-searing second, the final thread didn't just break, it incinerated. The long, slow poisoning of my life was finally, agonizingly, and cleanly over. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was sitting on my apartment floor clutching a mug of instant coffee Liam had made on my old hot plate. The sun came up streaming through the window, oblivious. I was just waiting for the insurance adjuster, for the world to end. I didn't know. Then at 7:01 a.m., I heard a sound from below. Not a crash, a scrape. Then the low, familiar rumble of a motor. I ran to the window. It was Mr. Henderson. He was in his old work clothes, and he was dragging his heavy-duty shop vac from the back of his truck. He plugged it into the outdoor outlet, and without a word to anyone, he started to vacuum the glass from the sidewalk. I ran downstairs, my feet bare. Mr. Henderson. He turned it off, his old eyes finding mine. They were sad, but they were steel. "This place has a soul, Julia," he said, his voice rough. "Souls don't die this easy." Then a truck pulled up. And another. It was Liam's entire contracting crew. They piled out with sheets of plywood, 2x4s, and tool belts. "Liam said you had a window problem," one of them, a big man named Sal, said, tipping his hat. "This one's on the house." By 10 a.m., the sidewalk wasn't a crime scene. It was a staging ground. They weren't there to gawk. They were there to work. Mrs. Gable from the post office arrived with a box of heavy-duty trash bags. The librarian, Mr. Davies, showed up with brooms. Customers I barely knew, people I'd only ever sold a scone to, arrived with gloves and coffee. This was it. This was the America I had always wanted to believe in. Not the one of spite and blood debts. The one built on resilience. The one where you just show up for your neighbors. Someone started a GoFundMe. Liam quietly showed me his phone. It was already at $5,000. My eyes blurred. I walked out onto the splintered entryway, my voice thick. "Thank you," I choked out. I can't accept. The insurance. It will cover the things." I gestured to the wreckage. "But this?" I put my hand on my heart. "Thank you." They didn't leave. They just kept working. Late that afternoon, a woman in a sharp blazer stepped over the plywood and through the makeshift door. The bakery was swept, the glass gone, the holes boarded up. It was a clean, empty, wounded shell. "Julia Bryant." I nodded, wiping my dusty hands on my jeans. "I'm Ann Resnick from the district attorney's office." We sat on the one unbroken bench Sal's crew had salvaged. "They're facing a slew of felony charges, Julia," she said, her voice all business. "Vandalism, breaking and entering, conspiracy. Mark is already toast with the embezzlement. But, with family," she sighed, "it can be complicated. Juries get weird. They'll try to paint you as the villain. They'll say it was a family dispute. We need to know if you are willing to testify, to see this through. Are you going to press charges?" I didn't even have to think. I looked past her out the newly boarded-up window at the townspeople still hauling debris. I saw Liam, his face smudged with dirt, directing traffic. I saw Mr. Henderson coiling a power cord. I looked at the community I had chosen, and the one that had in turn chosen me. I met the DA's eyes, the cold, diamond-hard clarity from last night, still there, burning bright and clean. "For everything," I said. "I am." 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. The trial was the biggest sensation Harmony Creek had seen in decades. It was standing room only. The Gazette called it the Finch trial. But it wasn't really a trial. It was an execution, and my family had handed the DA the sword. When Ms. Resnick played the security footage, a collective horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. It played out on a massive screen for the jury, the judge, and the entire town to see. The high-definition night vision green made it look like a found-footage horror film. They watched my father splinter the door. They watched my brother, his face a mask of rage, shatter my life's work with a baseball bat. They watched my mother, her voice a venomous shriek, pouring flour onto the floor and goading them on. And they heard every single word, every curse, every threat. They watched Mark spray paint slut across my face. Chloe, who wasn't involved in the break-in, sat in the front row pale and stone-faced as her husband's reputation was irrevocably destroyed. My mother's lawyer tried to paint it as a family dispute that got out of hand. Ms. Resnick just replayed the audio of my mother hissing, ruin it all." The verdict was swift. The sentencing was brutal. Mark, already facing 3 to 5 years for embezzlement, had felony destruction of property and conspiracy added on. He was gone. His sentence was extended so significantly he wouldn't see the outside of a state prison for nearly a decade. My father, David, his face a gray collapsed mask, got 18 months. The judge was merciless, citing the abhorrent, premeditated nature of the crime against his own daughter. But it was Sarah, my mother, who faced the coldest justice. Her lawyer had pleaded for mercy, painting her as a grieving mother manipulated by her husband and son. Ms. Resnick simply played the audio from the email trap, the lie about my father dying in room 304, and then the video of her directing the destruction. The judge called her the emotional architect of the crime. She avoided jail time, but just barely. 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and she, along with David and Mark, was held financially responsible for every single penny of the restitution to my insurance company. The final bitter irony. The legal fees combined with the restitution order were more than they could ever pay. They lost the house. The house I'd grown up in, the one they'd mortgaged to save Mark the first time, was seized and sold at auction to pay the debts they had incurred trying to destroy me. Today is the grand reopening of the new Finch. The sign is new, the letters a bold, warm cherry red. The windows are new floor-to-ceiling plate glass that floods the room with sunlight. The equipment is state-of-the-art, paid for by the insurance check that covered every last documented cent. The bakery is beautiful. It was rebuilt painstakingly by Liam and his crew, with half the town volunteering to paint, sand, and finish. And it is packed. The line is out the door and around the corner. Mr. Henderson is behind the counter. "Just for the opener," he claims, beaming, as he hands out sourdough starters. I move through the chaos, and I am not the haunted, approval-seeking girl who walked into that Sunday dinner a year ago. I am a business owner. I am the boss. I am confident, my voice clear as I direct my 2 new employees. I am warm, my smile genuine as I thank Mrs. Gable for the welcome back flowers. I am authoritative, my body moving with a purpose that feels new and ancient all at once. Liam, his arm covered in flour from helping me in the back, comes up and wraps his arms around my waist, kissing the side of my head. We live together now in the apartment where it all happened. We didn't move. We rebuilt. We reclaimed the space. He is my partner, my team, my family. And I don't flinch from his touch. I lean back against him, whole and safe. Later, as the last customer leaves, I stand in the center of my shop, the air smelling of sugar and fresh starts. I see my reflection in the new gleaming glass of the display case. My eyes are clear. The circles are gone. I look happy. I am finally completely blessedly free. The ultimate revenge wasn't watching them get led away in handcuffs. It wasn't seeing their house sold at auction. The ultimate revenge is this: the smell of my bread, the hum of my new espresso machine, the weight of Liam's hand in mine, my own unshakable success, my own profound hard-won peace. Sometimes I do think about that night. The sound of the glass breaking, the splintering of the door, the smell of the spray paint. But the sound that really echoes in my memory, the one I come back to, is the quiet digital click of the tablet as I hit save recording. It wasn't the sound of my family's life ending. It was the sound of mine just beginning. With the bakery rebuilt and her freedom secured, Julia's long fight was finally over. What did you think of her family's ultimate betrayal and the community that rallied behind her? We genuinely read all of your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.